And since about 2020, we've become aware that most of the nitrous oxide purchased by healthcare facilities is in fact leaking from the pipelines without ever reaching a patient. By decommissioning pipelines and switching to portable nitrous cylinders at the point of care, hospitals can reduce their greenhouse gas emissions by really important amounts. We know from data from the National Health and Climate Strategy that in the financial year 2021, nitrous oxide was responsible for 21% of healthcare's Scope 1 emissions in Australia. And this is equivalent of around 300,000 tonnes of CO2 emissions. So if we're able to decommission generally across Australia, we conservatively estimate that we could halve this and possibly even more. So this is a substantial amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we can avert. It's the equivalent of about, sorry, I've lost my place. But anyway, as you can see, it's a huge amount of our greenhouse gas emissions in healthcare. So people have been asking me how on earth we could have got to this position without realising it. Well, nitrous oxide was discovered a long time ago, in 1772, and its mind-altering and analgesic properties were famously enjoyed at laughing gas parties before it was first successfully used for anesthesia in 1844. So it has a long history. It's a weak anaesthetic agent, so it needs to be delivered in high concentrations to be effective. And with advances in anaesthesia and surgery, by the middle of the 20th century, nitrous oxide was being used in such high volumes for anaesthesia and other applications in hospitals that the portable cylinders needed to be replaced by inbuilt reticulated pipeline systems, which delivered gas from the supply room through hospital walls to the various points of delivery. And this allowed logistical efficiency, with larger cylinders needing less frequent replacement. So this is a photo of the nitrous oxide supply at my hospital, the Royal Children's Hospital. So you have a bank of large nitrous oxide cylinders connected to the manifold, and from here the gas is then piped through wall cavities and the operating theatre pendants to wall outlets at all clinical points of care, including the operating theatre, the emergency department, treatment rooms, and in the case of adult hospitals, the labour wards. But interestingly, over the past 15 years, the anaesthetic use of nitrous oxide has declined sharply. And this has been due mainly to concerns about adverse clinical effects of gas and the availability of newer alternative drugs. So today, nitrous oxide use in anaesthesia is uncommon, with the exception of paediatric gas inductions and for general anaesthetics for emergency caesarean sections. It needs to be noted, though, that nitrous oxide still has an important clinical role outside of anaesthesia, and it's used in relatively large quantities for labour analgesia, and it's also used for sedation in paediatric procedures and for dentistry. But given the drop in anaesthetic need for nitrous oxide and the evolving concerns about the environmental impact of the gas, when they looked in Scotland at a number of hospitals' use in the Lothian district of the NHS, they were surprised to find that the anaesthetic use was very small, but the hospitals were continuing to purchase large amounts of nitrous oxide. And so this led to the discovery and the publication of the large leaks found in the Scottish NHS. And this finding was then replicated and has been published in hospitals in the US, around the UK, in France, and also in Australia. So pipelines which were implemented because of the high volume of nitrous required at the time are now being found to be massively inefficient in the modern age. And it's important to note that the current Australian standards for maintaining and monitoring the pipelines do not detect these leaks. Just wanted to show you this important paper that came out of the United States in the British Journal of Anesthesia last year, because this was an important paper because they published findings from 47 hospitals across private and public networks in the United States. And they looked at their clinical use using the electronic medical record data and compared it to their purchasing. And on the left there, you can see that the majority of their purchasing was not due to clinical use, but was in fact due to leakage.
Sorry, buddy. Sorry, bud.
The graphs on the right show what they did at one of their hospitals when they decommissioned their pipelines and moved to portable cylinders. And so you can see that the system supply, represented by the blue dots, was very high in the 6 weeks before decommissioning. And in the graph on the right, when they moved to portable cylinders, the system supply then matched their clinical use, therefore proving that decommissioning pipelines and moving to cylinders has a really big impact on nitrous oxide purchasing and pollution. And they've done, at the time of this publication, they had decommissioned 25 of their hospitals, and the work, I believe, is ongoing. This is a table of other decommissioned hospitals, either through publication or through informal network information that we've got. And you can see that there are a number of Australian hospitals that are leading the way and have already decommissioned their pipelines. So that's the big opportunity, but there remains a number of challenges which we're going to hear about this evening. And one of the challenges is awareness and knowledge sharing about the problem. And there's also a challenge getting everybody on board in the hospital to collaborate and make these big and important decisions. We have ongoing challenges with understanding how best to serve the labour wards and their nitrous oxide requirements. And in paediatric hospitals, we have a challenge of measuring nitrous oxide used outside of the anesthesia department. There's a number of logistics involved in decommissioning nitrous pipelines, and these will be discussed this evening as well. This is a picture of the practical guide that was published last year as a collaboration between the University of Melbourne, the Australian Government and the Interim Australian Centre for Disease Control, which contains a whole lot of practical, useful information on how you can go about looking at your own hospital's nitrous oxide system and assessing it for leakage. As a result of all of this evolving information and advocacy by anaesthetists in Australia, the Australasian Health Facilities Guidelines changed last year. And so they state clearly now that reticulated nitrous oxide is not mandatory for any healthcare service, and that point-of-care cylinders can meet clinical requirements for the majority of healthcare facilities. DEA has written and published a position statement on nitrous oxide, which you can read, but essentially it says that facilities without birthing facilities should have no piped nitrous. Facilities with birthing facilities should consider only using piped nitrous to birthing suites. But if piped nitrous infrastructure is to remain, we need to have increased leak monitoring and accountability protocols. And we need to make sure that healthcare facility managers, engineers and clinicians are informed of the amendment to the facilities guidelines regarding nitrous infrastructure. That was all that I have to say. I think we're going to hear a lot more information about what's been happening in Australia and New Zealand in this area, which is really an exciting opportunity. Thanks.
Great. Thank you very much, Rebecca. If you can just unshare your slide now. It was interesting that you mentioned the Australian standards and their inability to quite deal with the problem with leaks from our systems. And when you think about it, if you have a long, complex branching system, as was present in the picture I showed at the start tonight, and then you pump miniature molecules of gas into it and then put it all under pressure, of course, it's going to be close to impossible to stop that from leaking out. It's just a matter of how much. And in fact, contractors, and several of us have had this experience, will often say things that lead you to believe that they expect that actually these systems are leaking and they just consider that normal. And one particular comment that I heard from a contractor not so long ago was that in his assessment, a newly installed system in a new facility, before you connect it to user end pieces of equipment, would be leaking 1% of its total volume of nitrous oxide available per day. That's before you even start clinical use. So it's a really tricky thing. We're going to move on now to our second speaker, and that is Associate Professor Justin Scono. He's an anaesthetist and Director of Research in the Department of Anesthesia at the Children's Hospital Westmead, once again here in Sydney, so back to New South Wales. And Justin, if you're able to share your slides, that'd be great.
There we go. Thanks, Anthony. Thanks for the intro. And got 10 minutes to get through this, and there's a fair amount to do. So thanks for the invitation to talk to everyone in the DEA. Pediatrics is often seen as a bit of a troublesome place because we use nitrous quite a lot. And so I'm going to fly through what we've been doing for the last 2 years at the Children's at Westmead and give you some news. So Bex covered the background wonderfully for those of you who don't know it already. But about 2 years ago, I thought, well, why don't we try and measure it as accurately as we can? And so we got busy with that. The Ministry of Health kindly funded the development of a very high resolution flow meter that can measure down to the mil what's happening in a hospital. And so you can see pictures that look similar to Beck's intro picture, a bunch of F8 packs, which are the biggest forms of nitrous you get going into a big hospital. And then those things down on the bottom right, those are the flow meters there that monitor things real time. We installed it in Feb last year and got data from Valentine's Day last year. I'm going to show you a quick graph. Graphs are supposed to put people to sleep, but this is what the first little bit of data looked like from the hospital. Two features that you're going to see straight away. You can see the spikes. Those are clinical use. No great surprise there. Nitrous sedations happening in the ward and theatre-based use. What the sharp eyes amongst you will notice is that the baseline never returns to zero. And essentially what you're looking at, that low grade, never getting back to zero kind of thing, is the background leak at the Children's Hospital at Westmead in February last year. And it literally varies a little bit over time, but it is constantly there. And so that's the method that we use to demonstrate the leak accurately. We did a little bit of data overlays because we've got a very good electronic medical record, so we can actually identify most of the peaks that we want to. That hasn't really changed things significantly, but it acted as a bit of a sanity check for us and allowed us to know that what we were seeing was real. So the leakage was around 50% of the nitrous that we were using at the time. The absolute leak was about 500 mils a minute. Now, half a litre a minute doesn't sound like a lot. A litre a minute doesn't sound like a lot, but that adds up to 500,000 litres a year with 250 to 500 tons worth of CO2e. So it is significant. So once we'd done this mid-year, we basically just said, okay, what are we going to do from here? And you can see some of the steps that we wanted to go ahead. We wanted to try and deal with the leaks at the hospital, and we said, well, let's try and get that leak to lower than 10%. Let's start trying to get people to use alternatives to nitrous if that's an option. And then let's use the flow meter in other locations. So I'm just going to sort of go in a time fashion. We took that flow meter that you saw and we've built a second flow meter from it, funded again by the New South Wales Health, Climate Risk and Net Zero unit. And that is now available for use at other institutions in New South Wales for the accurate monitoring of nitrous flows. We internally within the hospital, with that data system that I talked to you about, have been able to track clinical use extremely accurately in anesthetics. And so we can actually see we basically monitor the carbon intensity of the anesthetics that we give, main drivers there being sevoflurane and nitrous use. And you can see that from a baseline on the left-hand side, we've nearly halved the carbon intensity of the anesthetics we give at the Children's at Westmead. And that's a combination of increased clinician awareness and all of the good work that this group and others are doing to raise that awareness. The interesting thing is not only are we reducing the numbers of times clinicians are choosing to use nitrous, which is that top graph, about 50% of anesthetics now have some nitrous being used. But in addition to that, we've reduced the absolute amount of nitrous, so people are being more cautious with the dials. They aren't just dialing up the nitrous to 11 out of 10. They're being cautious with it and sensible, which is nice to know. So the second thing which Beck alluded to was procedural sedation. Now, we're a bit blind to that. None of the procedural sedation units in the hospital are in any way connected to anything that we can spy on. So what we did is a manual audit, which was a fairly massive job of work. We went through 5,000 sedation records across both of the hospitals in the network, and showed what most people can figure out in hindsight quite easily. The ED was 50% of the use, and they were using nitrous about 2.5 times a day. There was a cluster of other groups, the rehab groups and so on, who were using it 2 or 3 times a week. But then just about everywhere else in the hospital is using it less than once a month and sometimes once a year. So what we have is a massive network serving areas that simply don't use nitrous. So it's a disproportionate physical waste, really. So take-home points here, the nitrous use is actually really concentrated. And a lot of locations just don't really use it much. So the next steps I'm going to take you through here, leak localization, that has been tricky. It's 35-year-old infrastructure, and we were basically playing whack-a-mole. Every leak that we solved meant that another leak popped up somewhere else. And a few weeks ago, we had decided to decommission all the pipework at CHW, all the old pipework. That was a relatively easy decision to make. We decided to test that flow meter in another location that was next door at our adult hospital. It's in place there. It's 3-year-old infrastructure, very new infrastructure, and that is leaking with around 2 to 4 liters of leak per minute, which is around 1 to 2 million liters a year. So we're still verifying that data and making 100% sure there's no glitch in the matrix, but it looks like even new infrastructure leaks as well. We've done some cost effectiveness calculations about the changes that our kids' hospital has to do, and the biggest drivers really are the carbon price that you put into the calculations and how fancy the equipment you buy to do mobile work, and that is a reasonable cost but not massive. This is the most important part of the success that we've had in our institution. The clinical side engagement, right from the nurses and doctors in the wards all the way up to the chief executive, has been exemplary. It's been a really nice nitrous oxide working group, and we've made some big strides. That is the biggest stride we've made, and that's from our chief executive yesterday. The exec is committed to and planning for decommissioning of all pipe nitrous supplies at the whole of the Sydney Children's Hospital network. That's the biggest pediatric care facility in the country and includes 2 children's hospitals, my place, and Sydney Children's Hospital Randwick. So that's a little bit of very hot off the press news for everyone to give us a nice good feel. As you've noted, it's a fast moving field. That's mostly a good thing. You could make these pipe nitrous systems work if you really tried hard. You'd have to throw money at the job. And anywhere that chooses to stay pipe needs to have accurate monitoring by some means. My own personal view is that PEBS hospitals don't need nitrous, and that's supported by our recent decision. And that's pretty much where we're up to. There are a bunch of thank yous. I want to particularly point out Louisa Swain, who's one of our anaesthetists who's come to us from the NHS with a lot of experience, and she's helped drive the nitrous project to the point where it's at now. There's a bunch of other people there, but I specifically want to shout out to the SCHN executive for supporting this work, and Chris Mitchell, who was instrumental in the original design of the flow meter. So thanks, Chris, for that. Thanks everyone for your time, and looking forward to Matt and Chris's talks. Cass wanted me to put this up. For those of you who can take a quick snapshot of that, please do. We're trying to describe leakage of nitrous across Australia and New Zealand using a quick questionnaire, and we're about to start data collection. So that's a quick plug for Cass, Emily, and to an extent my work in that area. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very, very much, Justin. Well, that's incredible breaking news, actually. And here we are thinking we're missing out on the news, on the TV, but actually we're getting it right here. And that's incredible and unprecedented in Australia. Probably not so globally, interestingly, but yeah, really, really interesting stuff. So next, just to give an international flair to our meeting tonight, we have invited a Kiwi. And it's not just for that reason, though. He's here because he's done a lot of work on nitrous oxide from his home hospital in Dunedin Hospital in New Zealand. This hospital is a tertiary centre and it serves Otago in the Southland region of New South Wales. And he's done a lot of work with nitrous right across the hospital, not just in anesthesia, but elsewhere. So he's really getting the message out there and achieving some great things. So, Matt, off you go, and thanks very much.
Kia ora koutou, ko tititia te monga, ko mata o te awa, no o te poti a hau, ko Matthew Jenks toko ingoa, he kairehu a hau. So my name is Matthew Jenks, I'm from Ōtepoti, Dunedin. Thanks very much for having me along to speak tonight. So my journey started about 15 years ago, and it was around sort of waste audits and recycling projects mainly. But as time went on, I realized that addressing climate change in my work would be the most impactful thing I could do for health and the environment. So the first thing I needed to do was get some data. So in 2018, I took sabbatical leave to calculate the carbon footprint of my district health board. This included 4 hospitals.
I need some I need
4 hospitals serving about 320,000 people, and includes Dunedin Hospital, which is the hospital I work at, which is a 400-bed tertiary referral centre. This is the main take home from the carbon footprint work. Our carbon footprint was 28,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions. And as you can see, the primary reason for this large footprint was coal for heating our hospitals. Since the time of the footprint, we've done a lot of work to address that. The Dunedin Energy Centre, which supplies our hospitals with heat, which you can see in this picture, has been converted to locally sourced wood biomass from plantation forests, and Southland Hospital is running off locally sourced wood pellet. So we've largely addressed the coal emissions. But as you can see from the graph, the second biggest contributor to the carbon footprint, this is scope 1, 2, and some scope 3 emissions, is our medical gases, which contributed 12.6% to our carbon footprint. And when you break it down, it's predominantly due to nitrous oxide, very little due to sevoflurane, desflurane, and since the time of this footprint, we've eliminated the use of desflurane. And in particular, the nitrous oxide, that large nitrous oxide footprint you can see there, was due to the use of G cylinders for our reticulated nitrous oxide network at Dunedin Hospital in particular. And I won't go over it, but I think it's I'll mention it again. It's important to mention that it is a very potent greenhouse gas. It also a gas that destroys the ozone layer. But importantly, it lasts for a very long time in the atmosphere. It's up there for about 100 years. So it's a very important greenhouse gas to address. After I did the carbon footprint, the findings, I presented them to our executive and to our board, and they gathered some media attention, but in particular the issue of nitrous oxide. So our facilities team at this stage was leaned on to do some work looking for a leak, and they pressure tested the pipe network and found no problems with the pipe network itself. The next step was for them to replace the wall outlet seals, and you can see a picture of one of these wall outlet seals with the blue arrow pointing towards it. So they replaced all these wall outlet seals. And what you can see is a step change. So this graph shows tons of greenhouse gas emissions from nitrous oxide in the years along the bottom. And you can see about 2019, you can see a big step change, and that coincided with the replacement of the wall outlet seals. You can see the dark blue is from the G cylinders, and we went from about 328 G cylinders down to 56 G cylinders with the replacing of the wall outlet seals. And that was about the equivalent of 2,400 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per year. It also resulted in an annual saving of about $150,000 per annum. However, I continued to collect data each year, and we still had ongoing considerable usage of G cylinders. We didn't have any point of use data, but we had the procurement data, which showed that we were still going through a lot of G cylinders. So a decision was made to shut off reticulation to all low use areas. This was ICU, theatres, paediatrics, and ED, everything except the maternity ward, and to change to point of care cylinders as required at these locations. And so this is a picture of the operating theatre setup. So on the right, we have mind ray machines predominantly in our main operating theatres, and when required, the technicians are asked, and a cylinder is put on the back of the mind ray machine. For our GE cylinders, which we had in our remote locations, they required a D2 cylinder on a trolley, and that was plugged into the machine when required. And there has been some publicity around this in New Zealand. This is a recent article in the NZSA magazine, and other locations have been going through the process of de-reticulation or decommissioning. In particular, Burwood Hospital in Christchurch was one of the leading examples. So this is our initial piped reticulated network. In the bottom right, you can see our cylinder banks, our manifolds. They're across the road from the main hospital, piped underground to all the locations I mentioned: theatres, ED, ICU, and the maternity ward. After the changes or de-reticulation of those low-use areas, we were just left with a reticulation system to our maternity unit only. At about this time, there was a stroke of luck. So this work happened about a year ago, and about the same time, literally a month afterwards, the maternity unit's mixers that plugged into their wall outlet seals became end of life, and so they had to take them out of service, and they got some prices for replacing them, which came in a little under $200,000. In the interim, they were using what you can see in the picture, which is an Internox D2 cylinder on a trolley, and they were using these, which they'd used in the past. They were declined the CapEx request to replace the mixers initially, and were told to continue on with using point of care Internox cylinders in the interim. So in the last 6 months, I've gathered a bit of data for our maternity unit. They had 759 deliveries. Of those deliveries, 615 had laboured, and of those who had laboured, 63% had used Internox. This resulted in about 28 of those D cylinders being used on the maternity ward per month. And they were using about 350 litres of nitrous oxide per delivery, which roughly equates to half a cylinder. You can see in this graph, similar to previously, we've got greenhouse gas emissions in tonnes on the axis, and then we have quarters by year. And you can see about Q2 2024, which is when we decommissioned or shut down the low use areas, but shortly after that was when the maternity unit stopped plugging into the wall outlet seals. And you can see that orange bar there, which is the small Internox D2 portable cylinders, and the blue is the G cylinders. And you can see that the Internox use increased about that time. But what you can also see is the blue bars continue marching on, are roughly 4 G cylinders per month, with no connections to the walls at all over this period of time. So the conclusion is that this is all due to leakage. So after a year of the maternity unit using point of care cylinders, it was decided that we would switch off reticulation to the maternity unit and make it a permanent change to point of care cylinders. So I'll just take that back. So this graph here, what it shows is if now that we've switched off our maternity unit completely, we will just be using Entonox cylinders, and based on the average of cylinders that we're using, which is about 35 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions per quarter, that's almost a 95% reduction from our peak. We're in the process of building a new hospital. And I had previously presented a paper to the leadership group for the build in 2021, arguing we should not reticulate nitrous oxide to the new hospital except for the maternity unit. That was accepted at the time. However, 1st of August this year, we have revised that decision in light of the fact our maternity unit is just using point of care cylinders and has done so successfully for 12 months. We are now not going to reticulate any of the hospital, including the maternity unit, and nitrous oxide will just be available point of care via cylinders. So the things I've learned from this process is that data is extremely useful to help guide you, and that tackling some of these low-hanging fruit with high impact is a good approach, particularly where it's within your sphere of influence, where it's easier to make things happen. And what we've also learned in the last 12 months that dereticulation of a maternity unit is feasible and still provides with nitrous oxide, but without the waste. Thanks very much.
Thank you very, very much, Matt. Look, for a long time, it's been the case that New Zealand has been a groundbreaking country. And with regards to what you've done there with your birthing suites, that's how I would classify that. Even ahead of the UK, in fact, which is saying something significant. So that's terrific work. You made a comment about the duration of nitrous in the atmosphere, and it's funny, whenever I think about someone using nitrous oxide to induce a child, it strikes me that that nitrous oxide will still be in the atmosphere when that child's grandchild is actually walking around and having anesthetics themselves. Not to mention the nitrous that was leaking out of the pipelines when that child was being induced will still be in the atmosphere when that child's grandchildren are here. So it's an interesting thing to ponder. Nitrous is the primary cause of ozone depletion, by the way, worldwide. We're going to move on to our last speaker now. That's going to be Chris Mitchell. Now, Chris is from Perth, and he's an anaesthetist at Charles Gardner Hospital. He's done some great work over there, not just at his own hospital. Charles Gardner is a tertiary referral centre, one of the biggest hospitals in the country. It's also a neurosurgical and transplant centre. Chris, you're free to go whenever you feel ready.
Thank you, Anthony, and thanks for the invite to talk on this webinar. So, been introduced. We over in WA, we started up a group called No Nitrous to try and push this issues along, and whatever it seems I have done, it's actually been the efforts of many people at this end to make the change. The question is how I got involved. Well, I'd started off mostly worrying about desflurane in WA in the public service. That was contributing about half of our CO2, with nitrous being the other half, but desflurane seemed the easiest one to tackle. But by about 2021, most of that had finished being used in WA. So we moved on to the next low-lying fruit, which was the nitrous. And just adding on to really what Rebecca said, historically, we really needed nitrous. All our drugs were really slow acting. We had morphine, halothane, or even isoflurane as our major drugs. And it was impossible to give an anesthetic that stopped quickly unless you used nitrous. And so for that reason, a long time ago, nitrous was king, and all anaesthetists used it, and most in obstetrics were commonly using it. But it really changed once we had fast-acting drugs. We got fentanyl and a whole lot of other opiates that are quick-acting drugs, and sevoflurane being a rapid-acting volatile anaesthetic. And with that and the realisation that how bad nitrous was for the environment, it's no doubt that it's sort of, I think, the bit of the devil in the system at the moment. And And really, it shouldn't be used for anaesthetics. There's a lot of people out there still using it, and that's one of the things we need to work at with education. But if you've done a lifetime of anaesthetics using nitrous, for some people, it is hard to change. But there's no scientific reason for nitrous to be used in anaesthesia. We still do need it for obstetrics. I was good doing the seminar. I actually went back and pulled back through some emails, and this was February 2021. I started looking into the issue and sent off my first email to my engineer and followed it up with many other emails without hearing anything back. So I went out and got the data myself on what was going on by contacting BOC, which are the primary supplier to Sir Charles Gardner Hospital. And at the point of me getting the first information, this first star represents where we were up to. At that stage, we were purchasing about 12. We had purchased 12 F8 cylinders in 3 years. So we're using 4 F8 cylinders a year, and F8's got 233 kilos of CO2 in it. 1 kilo of CO2 gives you 530 litres of 1 kilo of nitrous gives you 530 litres of nitrous. So at the time, Charlie's was purchasing 500,000 litres of nitrous a year, which meant the clinical usage should have been about 1 litre a minute for every single minute of the year. So I thought that seemed a lot for our hospital, and I did a bit of observation of just walking around theatres, and I didn't actually in my walking find one single theatre using nitrous. So I followed that up with an audit of the staff, and I'd say the majority of staff admitted to using nitrous a little bit, but we only had a couple of members who said they used it regularly for anaesthesia. We followed that up with an audit of the ASIS machines that we have at Charlie's. They're a bit annoying that they only monitor every 1,000 litre of nitrous they use. But after a 3-month audit, it was obvious we're only using a very small amount of nitrous. So purchasing was vastly different to usage, and I'd confirmed that. And so then I got up to about this point, and I started writing a huge number of emails to engineering, pharmacy, and anyone who had listened to try and to investigate the problem and fix it. Finally, once somebody sent an engineer up to the department and said to the secretaries, "Oh, the problem's been fixed, don't worry about it." It was at the manifold, and that was all the information we got. And so this is a photo of the Sir Charles Gardner's Hospital manifold, but I had no idea what was actually wrong with it at that point. So I sent another email off to our engineer, and once again got no response, but I was interested to know what was the actual problem with it. Had they updated our map? Because I sort of knew that the map at Charlie's must have been a bit dodgy, because this was our library at Charlie's, and it hasn't been used as a clinical area for over 30 years, but I could still walk into the library, and if I wanted to get a little bit of nitrous, it was just a case of pushing the button, which I didn't think was so good for our registrars being able to just access nitrous at will in the library. So I didn't do too much more until we got the next data point. And as you can see, nearly a year later when I got the next data, the leak hadn't changed at all. And so then I really got on to writing a lot of emails, actually organised a few meetings. Meetings were easy to organise. Getting anyone to do anything was impossible. And it wasn't until we got the next data point that we could tell that not only was there a big leak, the leak had actually doubled. And so now we're up to about 2 litres a minute being lost. At which stage I got a new engineer helping us, and we started finding things. The first thing was at least, and I say it's at least, 6 of our pendant systems were seriously leaking. And they leak because they're meant to get serviced or looked at least once a year, and they should be serviced every 4 years, and every 10 years, all the pipes should be changed. I'm pretty confident that the Sir Charles Gardner pendants had never been serviced since they were installed somewhere in the late 70s. And actually, if you ask around engineers around the country or hospitals, it's very hard to find anyone who will admit that they've ever serviced a pendant, because they're very difficult to service. And if you open them in WA anyway, the opinion is that's like opening the roof space, and you need to do 5 days of cleaning your theatres after opening the roof space. So hospital don't sign off to get them serviced because it means shutting down the theatre for 5 days. But the real peak in our leak actually was because there was a hole in the pipe. I think this is remarkably rare, and I think it's nearly quite funny that in one of the few hospitals at the time that somebody was really chasing around trying to find leaks, that we got a leak in our pipe. But you can see the gas pipe was running under a water pipe, and after 50 years of it just slowly rubbing it had put a hole in the pipe. The good thing that happened, everyone at this stage acknowledged that we had a problem too big to fix. We didn't do kids, we didn't do obstetrics, and it wasn't easy, but the decision was made to decommission, and we did that about midway through 2023. So I just want to summarise where all these problems are happening then. The first problem is the manifold can leak at any time. There are parts on the manifold that must be replaced every 3 years, and they're replaced every 3 years because engineering know that they are prone to leak. But they're not checking them all the time. And when they do check them, they just spray soapy water at them and look for bubbles. It's not the most accurate way to look for leaks. The next big problem is our theatres, and pendants are particularly the problems because they're not getting serviced according to the Australian standards, and actually most pendants don't get serviced at all. There's the wall outlets. The good thing is that they're very easy to access, and it only costs about 20 cents to buy the new O-ring to go in them, so they tend to get serviced and aren't probably the major cause of the leaks. And then the last one, these characters on the right, us anaesthetists are still the problem because there's a lot of anaesthetists still using nitrous, which makes it hard for hospitals to decommission if people are using it. Just thought I'd show you another hospital in Perth, in WA. And you can see the graph here that they, for many years, were using about 1 G cylinder a year. And then they started using more and more, and no one actually picked that this problem was happening, which I was a bit amazed. But a lot of smaller hospitals, the people changing the bottles aren't really trained to be considering about the problems, and they're just paid to replace the bottles. So that's what was happening in this hospital. And the hospital had been checked 3 times during this leak for leaks, and they'd never found it. But I'll show you just the video of what it looked like in the end, and you'll hear the spray going on, the componentry. And there was the cause of the leak, which is one of the pressure overload switches in the manifold. And this is the part that needs to be replaced every 3 years. And unfortunately, it's a common place for leaks to happen. So for most places, as everyone said, the solution is decommissioning. And we've had some good success over here in WA. The first one to go was Sir Charles Gardner Hospital, which really wasn't too hard because we did no peds, we had no deliveries, and we had big problems that were going to cost a lot of money to fix. So we decommissioned. It cost us $20,000 to decommission. But if you add up the costs we were spending in nitrous, the costs we were spending in hiring the nitrous bottles, and the little bit of servicing that they were doing on the system, that was $20,000 a year as well. So it was cost neutral in 1 year. Even more excitingly, Broome, Northwest WA, lovely place to visit for a holiday. They the next to decommission, and they do 300 births a year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Kalamunda, very small hospitals, also decommissioned. What I'm particularly excited about is we've got 3 hospitals nearly there. Rockingham, a bit south of Perth, does 1,500 deliveries a year, and they have not been using their reticulated nitrous for the last 3 months, and it's about to be turned off in the next couple of weeks. Armidale Hospital, just out in the hills, just outside of Perth, do 2,000 deliveries a year, and they also aren't using their reticulated nitrous. We haven't got a date. It's turning off, but it's very, very soon. Fremantle Hospital, tertiary hospital, but doesn't do deliveries or any kids. They're about to go. And in the pipeline, Royal Perth Hospital have also, which is our biggest tertiary referral hospital in Perth, they're about to decommission. They're currently not using their pipe system either. Interestingly, they're the only hospital that I've ever heard that when they did a proper pressure test actually only had a very small leak, and that leak was 25 litres of nitrous a day. It's probably the lowest number I've heard of, excuse me. And all of our WA, what does that stand for? WA Country Health Service. So that's an accumulation of about 20 hospitals. They have now committed to all fully decommissioning. So we've got a lot in the pipeline happening. Thought just talk a little bit about labour wards. Matt Jenks was mentioning about how a lot of wards it's possible just to use Entonox, and I think that's a really simple solution for most places, but certainly in WA, most midwives are used to varying their concentration of nitrous they'd want to use. And as far as I can find, there's 2 nitrous mixes available on the market in Australia. One's called the E Advantage. It's about $14,000 with all set up. And the other one is the Portex Nitronox Plus, about 12,000. There's some key features with these that are really good. Firstly, they give the range of being up to give 70% nitrous. What's different compared to a lot of cheaper units that are used in dental situations, it's their high flow units. The unit can have an instantaneous flow or a peak flow of up to 200 litres or 260 litres a minute, which is what you need when you're going to rapidly want to inhale during labour pain. So that's why they're different to dental units, which are a lot cheaper. The next thing, and I'm very pleased to see that both of the hospitals have got scavenging units on their unit. So if you look at the E Advantage, there's a yellow box at the bottom. So the inhaled gases are going into there, and then even if they're blown in rapidly, it fills the box, but then the constant suction will remove that nitrous from the labour ward. And the similar things going on with the Nitronox with the bag. This is actually a really good reason to encourage your units to get onto using mobile units, because it's an easy way to introduce scavenging systems. And there's a real issue with every hospital that ever tests itself for nitrous levels will find that the occupational health and safety levels are being exceeded. Australia's got really tight levels, 25 parts per million, and most places that test find their rooms are getting well above 100 during usage. And it's a lot because of poor circulation, but also that they're not using scavenging. So it's a way of encouraging midwives to consider using these portable units. It's a trolley, which the midwives like. They can move it around everywhere, and they use D-size cylinders. I have got a little query about talking to the the midwives at Rockingham. They seem to think that this Nitronox unit's always leaking a little bit, so they're still getting leaks. And so they have correctly got to the stage of always turning off their nitrous bottle and oxygen bottle when the unit's not in use. Theatre options, I think that's already been gone over by Matt, but the options are really simple. One, you stop using the stuff. Two, if you're still using the stuff a bit, having nitrous on the back of the machine on a yoke is reasonably easy. Costs somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 to get the yoke put onto a machine. The easier and much cheaper solution for hospitals, especially when they're not using much nitrous, is just to have some portable D-size cylinders that are pulled into theatre and to connect it onto the machine as needed. So that's all of my talk. Just wanting to acknowledge again, in WA, we've got the Green Theatre Network that have been good at spreading some green messages to the around the state, and all of those people have been involved in the Nitrous project, as well as particularly Elliot Smith, who helped me set up the No Nitrous project, which has also been helpful. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Chris. Thank you so much for contributing. That was wonderful, and you're doing so much work over there. It's really incredible. So we've got New Zealand leading the way on one side, and then Perth over on the other side of the country doing pretty well. It's amazing. I wanted to just comment on a couple of things you said, Ben. 500,000 litres at Charles Gardiner is interesting. 500,000 litres of nitrous equates to burning about 100,000 litres of diesel, or the difference between recycling 100 tonnes of your hospital waste versus just popping that waste in landfill. And it is interesting how often when we're talking about sustainability, we think about our waste a lot and recycling, but nitrous really stands out. Regarding the pendant comments, a very recent ED development that I've been associated with has a significant leak in a portion of its pipes, and that happens to be the portion of pipes that are connected to the pendant systems. So I think pendants, and they are also known to be quite a culprit for leaks in general. If there are anaesthetists here who are listening and emergency department personnel, probably the two main groups, I wonder how often you've seen someone taking apart a pendant in your operating theatre or in your ED. I haven't seen it in my whole career, and I'm sure that most of you wouldn't. If you try to look and dig deeper about who's responsible for servicing those pendants, it gets incredibly nebulous indeed. So I suspect that there aren't many pendants being serviced in Australia. Holes in pipes, uncommon probably, but there have been at least two examples that I've heard about directly, one in Wyong and one in a large Sydney hospital that was found sort of by chance, but by a very witty anaesthetic department director though, mind you. And you were talking about demand valves with some of those systems. You were talking about the standalone point of care cylinders. Demand valves can be culprits for leakage, and it has been the case in the UK that they've been found to be problems. So, for example, at Hull University Hospital, they have taken to the practice in their birthing suite of removing demand valves or turning them off between uses and actually not leaving them on, which is a common practice to leave valves like that attached to nitrous and just on, thinking that that little valve will do its job. It's not the case. So look, I think it's a bit of a time for Q&A now, and between myself and Eugenie, I hope we can manage the flood of hands that are going to pop up on the screen with any questions. I would say no one should be shy. We've heard from people who have spent thousands of hours in this field, so they know a lot, and their experience is extensive. The simplest question, the most crazy sounding question, please, if you want to ask it, just ask it, because these are the people to ask.
That's right. And just to reiterate what Anthony said, to ask a question, we think it will work best if you can, when you want to ask a question, put your hand up and your camera on, and you'll come up on the screen and we can ask our speakers. Though there is one question in the chat at the moment from Amy, who's interested to know the input and support from pharmacy departments across these decommissioning projects. I guess we know that in the UK and Scotland, it really has been led at times by pharmacists, and wondering if anyone wanted to comment on involvement of pharmacy departments in Australia and New Zealand. Or maybe we have different advocates here. Yes, Chris.
I'm happy just to mention that at Charlie's, I tried getting pharmacy involved because it's an S4 drug and it makes sense that they're involved, but they had zero willingness to be involved or take on that extra burden. Interestingly, though, the success we're having in WA Country Health Service is mostly because the pharmacists have become interested, and it's greatly helping the system. So getting pharmacy involved is fantastic if it's achievable.
Eugenia, I might chip in there. We're working with our pharmacists, but it's a little bit like the interaction with the engineers, where it's just quietly been ticking along for ages. Pharmacy isn't really involved in nitrous, and when it's raised that an S4 drug is being used in various places, the downside might be that suddenly everyone becomes quite concerned. And so we're busy trying to keep a rein on a sudden need to track every single cylinder to the nth degree, and it's an interesting tension. We don't have the right answer yet, but I don't actually know how the UK handles it. I haven't heard of cylinder thefts, but they are concerned about it, and so we're working with them to try and responsibly manage an S4 drug, but still enable cylinder use across our whole network. So that's just a job of work for us. So I'd actually be interested in hearing other groups who've dealt with that challenge.
Yes, agree. And that's a good point to bring up as well, isn't it? To actually the management of the cylinders, wherever there are OH&S issues and theft issues. And does anyone else want to comment on that? And
I actually just quickly on that, I think it's interesting. You get pharmacy involved and it can get a bit bureaucratic very quickly. And I find that one of the problems with decommissioning is this whole idea of storage of nitrous suddenly becomes an issue. But the labour wards have always had nitrous bottles in labour ward. It's no great change to what's happening. They've always had a backup supply. So if the reticulated service stop working, that they can deliver nitrous to the women. So for most services, it's not actually changing very much, but it just heightens everyone's attention to the issue when you go to decommission.
That's right. And I happen to know, and I can't remember which hospital it was now, and probably just as well, that in the past, not always, the manifold cylinders weren't actually always secure or locked anyway. Admittedly, they might be a little bit large to run away with, but yes. Okay, maybe just when we're talking about the pharmacists then, and more broadly, Justin, you particularly mentioned that it had exemplary clinical engagement across your hospital network. Do you have any insights that you could share about what enabled that? Was it because you had your champions, or how did you go about getting that really important broad clinical engagement?
Look, I'm not sure what the magic sauce is, but we've got a CE, Catherine Cox, who is very supportive of sustainability matters across the board, and she's put together a great team. So we re-employed a sustainability manager a few years ago, and other members of our exec are involved. And so when we brought to them the real world data, they've looked at it and gone, okay, we can make decisions with that. So I think local champions, as both Matt and Chris have demonstrated, are crucial. Data is going to change minds, and so some people might, in hindsight, say, maybe your expensive flow meters were a bit of a waste of money given the decision that's made, but I would say that helped make the decision. So if you can go to them with data on purchasing, as Matt and Chris have demonstrated, which is the cheapest route to do it, you'll get their ear, and then the rest of us can help mount the argument. But yeah, I've been lucky. We've been lucky with our exec. They've been very supportive.
Okay, that's good. And just to report back in the chat there, Palace, who's at Broome Hospital and we know has really led the decommissioning or been part of the team leading the decommissioning there, reports back to us in the chat that it would be quite hard to steal the very large cylinders that are attached to their eAdvantage equipment. So they've had no concerns about that over the year of use. Great. And so it would be good. We've got about 60 people here. If there were some other questions, otherwise you're going to get questions from Anthony and us, which is, I think, potentially a little bit, I don't know, mainstream. But we've got Ying. Do you have a question, Ying? Yeah, that's
Yes, I do. Thank
okay.
you for the insights from the panel. I'm an obstetrician, but I don't deliver any more babies at the Royal Women's Hospital, and working with our team of engineers and facility manager to look at ways we can reduce our leakage, which has been estimated to about 50% at the Royal Women's, which is a tertiary hospital in Melbourne. And our nitrous usage rate is about 48%. And my question is for Matt and anyone with, I think Rockhampton, where there's about 2,000 births. Ours is about 2,500 of women will use nitrous per year at our hospital, and our labour ward has 20 beds. So just to estimate, if we were to go to the portable mixers, how these units have worked out how many to have them in stock. Is it just a rate of use that you calculate the number of trolleys to make sure they are on hand? And in the case of when Etanox is used, and that would only supply, say, 2 labours before a new cylinder is required, what has been the experience of midwives needing to change or get a new cylinder for every 3rd birth that they might look after? Thanks.
I'll leap in there. Those are really good questions. So we have 1,700. Sorry, 1,700. I've got a cold at the moment as well. See if that works.
Whiskey.
1,700 deliveries. We have 7 birthing units. And what we've done is just have 1 cylinder in each room, and then we have 3 full ones in the storage area. Apologies. By having the cylinders in each room, plus the ones in storage, we've got enough on site, and then we have a 15 off site. So we're only going through about 1 per day cylinder. In terms of changing them over, we have them, that's been one of the big issues because the midwives find the manual handling difficult. Getting them in and out of they're relatively heavy when they're full. I think they're about 17 kilos. And so what we have is the orderlies, when they bring up the full ones, they will load them into a trolley. So all they have to do is collect the trolley with the cylinder in it and put a regulator on it. So they can do that pretty quickly. If they've emptied the cylinder, they usually won't have any interruption to analgesia. They might get a brief interruption. That's all I can say with my coughing.
No, probably it is, isn't it? Does anyone else on the panel or Anthony want to make more comment about that? And we'll give Matt a little bit of a rest with his voice.
Yeah, look, my experience in obstetrics is not great, but probably only at one of my institutions. There, they regularly use Entonox cylinders, about 1,600 deliveries a year, but they use piped nitrous predominantly. But they have I think it's about 2 rooms that don't have piped access, so not uncommonly they use cylinders. Because I'm so obsessive about things, every time I'm over there, I talk to them about their experience with using Entonox. They have them on trolleys, and the midwife feedback that I've ever had has been very positive. They actually find them very easy to use. They don't have to actually manually handle them. They're always provided there in a trolley. I'm not sure who actually puts them on the trolley. That I'd have to look into, but no complaints when they're using the cylinders. They find it just fine. Some of them like it better.
Go on. I was going to ask Chris, and maybe you were going to say this, Chris, because obviously in Western Australia, there's some big maternity facilities now planning to decommission. How are they preparing for that? Or do you know?
I spoke to one of the midwives at Rockingham Hospital, so they're doing 1,500 deliveries a year. They do about 1 D change a day. That's what their current usage is. They've got 5 machines that they can move around, and honestly, they were delighted with it and they like the system. So it's been a plus, not a minus for them. The only other issue I'd make, though, I would have enough additional systems so that you could encourage that when the midwives could see that the level of gas in the system was dropping, that they don't do an early change of the D size bottle. What that is an indicator is that they should go and get another Entonox system and have it on standby. And so when it does fully exhaust, then they just disconnect the anesthetic airway system from the system they're using, connect it onto the other system and continue. And it means that instead of returning partially full bottles, you're nearly getting fully empty bottles, which will decrease what we're returning, because anything we return to the manufacturers or the providers of our gas is just getting vented to the environment.
Yes, thanks for that.
One other small point, we did have one issue with a burn from changing the regulator. So one of the midwives got quite a significant burn on her hand. So it's important to, since that time, there's been a lot of in-service training around how to change the regulators over. Because if they don't line up properly, you can get a release of gas and a burn.
Okay. I had wanted to ask you, Justin's put his hand up, so maybe we'll go there. And then I was going to ask you after that, Chris, to tell us a little bit about the soapy water test, which you seemed to show a photo of, and how that was one of the ways that we were looking for nitrous leaks, which seems quite bizarre in a tertiary health service. But maybe Justin, yes, please, and then Kaz.
I'll just drop in for three quick things. From a pediatric provision point of view, it's way lower than obstetric. As I showed you in the piece, ED uses a maximum of 2.5 sedations a day, and we've looked at peaks there. At a max, they used it 6 or 7 times in a day. So that's allowed us to start planning for purchasing of these machines. The new machines are not particularly cheap, so trying to find the money is tricky. Kath Asher's got a question in the chat there, just asking about safe disabling of the wall unit when decommissioning. And we are literally, working on that solution. And I'd be interested in Matt, Chris's experience here. We've seen the caps that go on, and obviously the system gets depressurized. But what about just cutting the entire thing out and leaving a blank space on the wall? What approaches have been used when you've got a decommissioned system to make it look nice and sweet?
So we've got multiple hospitals who have decommissioned, and I'm actually on the Australian standards at the moment, and we're writing in an extra section to the standards about decommissioning. But it'll probably take 1.5 years for that to be published. But the simple thing is that there's a really simple structure to how you should decommission your system. And probably in the next few months, I'll be able to do a quick blurb on how to do that. But the best thing is, and what the standard's going to say, is that you should cap off the wall first. And it's best if the cap itself has the words decommissioned or out of service on the cap, so a metal cap that screws in, that's used a wrench to tighten it up so that no one can just take it off with their fingers. And that's the start of the decommissioning process. For anyone who's discussing this with engineers, we don't need to remove the pipes from the wall. We don't need to remove anything other than the bottles at the manifold, and to tidy up the manifold so that doesn't get dirty and spidery and those sort of problems. But decommissioning is a very simple process, and a big hospital like Charlie's, the biggest, it costs $20,000. And the most important thing to do is when it's decommissioned and that means changing all the alarm panels in the hospital, is just doing another final check that all the other gases, alarms, are still working correctly. And that's probably the one detail that might have been missed in a few decommissionings so far, so that each year every hospital should be checking all the alarms anyway for every theatre. But after you decommission, you should do another quick check that all your alarm panels are working.
Kaz, you've got your hand up. Hello, good to see you here.
Thanks, Eugenie. What a great webinar by everyone. Really, really informative. I just want to kind of reflect that about 2 years ago, this was all very new and we didn't really know what we were embarking on. And now it looks like hospitals should decommission whole scale, and there's still a little bit of a question mark over birth suite. If we move forward another 2 years, what does the panel think that the future of this infrastructure looks like? And what do they think the key steps to us achieving that future will be?
Go
Well,
on,
the
Eugenie.
panel
You
would
have a
like-
go at that one.
Pardon? What, Chris? Did you?
Yeah, you have it. You go on. You tell us what you think's going to happen. You're the most associated with the high powers.
When it comes to nitrous decommissioning, I think it will become standard. Actually, we're moving so quickly in this space, and some of you may know that I'm helping the Department of Health actually compile a database that can be a public database of what hospitals have decommissioned in Australia. At the moment, we still do have less than 10, as shown in Beck's talk, but it's going to move fast and will become the norm, I feel. There are certain barriers, like some of our anaesthetic machines, if we want to keep use in some hospitals, need to have new attachments and potentially new machines, but I can see that in a very short amount of time. And look, to be honest, I've been surprised how quickly it's moved, particularly in obstetrics. So it's been really good to hear of those examples tonight in obstetrics and pediatrics, because I had thought that might take a little bit longer. And it really is important, isn't it? This is a low-hanging fruit, as Chris really emphasised in his talk. And before I think we can even begin to talk about decreasing our use, our actually administration of nitrous clinically, and we are talking about that a bit, but we really need to address this first and then look at the rest of our nitrous use. That would be my answer. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
I'd agree with you, Jenny. The two obvious areas we've just seen Matt's presentation on obstetric side use, and that's really encouraging. And then we've managed to get some runs going nicely with pediatrics. Those are the obvious ones. And with those two sort of handbrakes released a little bit, I think a large scale decommissioning just seems to be the obvious thing to do. And the getting this talk and these opinions out to the engineers and so on, because DEA type people it's preaching to the choir type thing. There are a lot of people who are perfectly well adjusted, but they just are not as aware of the problem, and they may be your hospital engineer and so on. So trying to get the message out at a healthcare level seems to be the route, and various states are busy doing that now. As Bart says in the chat there, New South Wales Health has started to move quite quickly on that. And so, I think it's going to happen very fast, and support it. Question is, what's our next challenge? Where's the next big carbon hotspot to go and smack?
That is a good question. It's not what this webinar is about, though, but that's what we'll have our next webinar about, I think. So we're up to suggestions on that. Peter's got his hand up, and then if your voice is holding up on the graph that you showed us, maybe I'll just ask you briefly first. You showed a significant decrease in nitrous use in 2022 and 2023, but there was also a decrease in 2020, and I wondered if that was to do with COVID activity. Or if you comment on that and how COVID might have impacted our nitrous emissions.
I'm not sure whether it did. The two big steps were when we replaced the wall outlet seals, and that was around 2019.
So maybe that was it. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, and then more recently, now that we've fully switched off reticulation to maternity and theatres. So those are where the two big steps are.
Yeah.
I don't think there was any particular signal around COVID that I could see in the data. And my data is different to, say Chris and Justin, who and it's just purely procurement data because it's relatively easy to get. You can just get what you're procuring. So I don't have any end use data. But for my purposes, it was useful. I could just get the movement I needed with that alone. I didn't need to go to the level of getting the usage data as well to confirm that it was a leak. We could just do it based on procurement data and then taking steps and seeing what happened.
And that's really important, isn't it, too? And that's what they're doing in the UK and many health services, I believe. They're not actually looking for the leak or trying to assess the usage of nitrous. They are just going straight to decommissioning now.
And while I'm still able to speak, I'll just say one thing about what's the next big challenge. And I think that one of the big challenges ahead in this space is for new builds, in particular, the reticulation of maternity units, because I think there's still a lot of new builds being approved that have reticulation to maternity units. And I think the examples that Chris gave of Rockingham and Armidale and these other hospitals that are proving that you can have a maternity unit without reticulation is really, really helpful for those who are sort of going into bat for not reticulating maternity units going forward in new builds.
Right, thank you. Peter, thanks for being patient there.
Yeah, thanks for the great information tonight. I got two questions. The first one is hopefully a quick one to Justin. In your flow graph, how do you explain that sometimes your flow dips below your baseline? And the second question is, any tips for funding? Now, in my hospital, I pretty much have an agreement that we pretty much could decommission our part nitrous system, but I need about $160,000 to retrofit the anesthetic machines and the maternity unit to go to cylinders, and we're losing about $10,000 per year in nitrous because, in this case, unfortunately, it's dirt cheap. And I'm not aware of any net zero fund in Queensland. Any other tips to get that funding?
Cool. Okay, you got sharp eyes there, Peter. Yeah, the flow does drop down to zero. You've got a very large 4-bar environment, which is the actual hospital, and then you've got a 50-bar environment, which goes from the F8 pack to the actual manifold, and the flow meter's in between those two. And so you've got gas regulators and systems that can expand and contract. And usually you see those drops to zero just before or after a big flow transient. So we think they might just be reflected pressure waves in the whole system. We haven't dug into great detail on that, but I think it's just a artifact within monitoring, and it's not related to any kind of physical zero flow phenomenon. That funding amount, $160,000, wow, that's huge. So, the cheaper solutions that Matt and others have suggested, back of not using $1,500 yokes to retrofit your anesthetic machines, but just using portable cylinders would be the way to drop that cost.
Yeah, the PRN cylinder to be connected was just outright rejected for space and workplace health and safety reasons, and the quote we got for our GE machines is $4,000 per machine to retrofit the yoke. And then the maternity unit to change them over with the new machines is about the same. So $80,000 each, and then $20,000-$30,000 for decommissioning. Yeah, that's my biggest problem.
Peter, if I could just encourage you just on your figures, you might be using $10,000 worth of nitrous, but if you're going through that, you probably have F8 packs at your hospital. Each F8 pack to hire it is $3,000 a year. So you must have a minimum of 3 F8 packs. So that's another $10,000 a year. Plus they'll be spending $5,000 to $10,000 a year to maintain the system. So you will actually, it won't be a $9,000 cost. You'll have a $30,000 cost a year in actually maintaining your service. So that's certainly, starts, that's then at worst 4 or 5 years to be budget neutral. But I would encourage you not to look at yokes and to look at the portable cylinders, because that's a very cheap way. And the best part is once people are using portable cylinders, it's amazing how use for something that was so desperately necessary a little while ago, when they actually have to walk down the corridor or ask someone to get the nitrous, they suddenly find a way of giving anesthetics without nitrous, and very rapidly nitrous use will drop.
Yeah, that's how we got rid of the Desperane in the first place, isn't it? You had to ask for it. But yeah, the portable cylinders are just unacceptable to our departmental director and anesthetic tech lead.
One other comment I was going to make, the other option is if portable cylinders are in an impossibility. I've seen a few of the UK hospitals. What they do is they take their blue hose and they take it from their anaesthetic machine and over to the wall, and then they do a wall-based nitrous cylinder. So then it's a permanent cylinder that's in the room, but it's getting turned off. And really, there's no cost to that apart from building a cage or a wall mount for the cylinder to sit in. And that will depend on your theatre if that's possible. But I think a lot of theatres, that would be a reasonable option for how to get nitrous there for people who are intolerant of bringing down a trolley.
Peter, just to jump in, Louisa Swain is busy getting some GE cylinders from the UK that literally clip onto the back of the anesthetic machine. So it's not the yoke and it's not on a trolley. It just hooks onto the back of the machine. It's plastic. It's manufactured, I think, by GE. We should have that in the next little while to try out. It's just a C cylinder, but that may be something that gets that kind of idea might get your department director on sides rather than something sitting on the floor. Somehow everyone worries about a single cylinder on the floor, but they don't worry about all the other surgical equipment that's lying around in the theatre. Curious.
Yeah, good. Thanks. Well, what do you think, Anthony? Do you think we should wrap things up? Because we've had some good questions.
I think, yeah, look, we don't want to keep everyone longer than the advertised time, plus some. Look, I guess we just did talk about future directions before. I'll make a couple of comments perhaps before we finish up. But in terms of new hospital builds that aren't going to have pipelines for nitrous oxide, it's probably worth alluding to them. Geelong Women's and Children's new hospital and operating theatres will only have piped nitrous oxide to their birthing suite. St Vincent's Hospital in Sydney has said that they will not be installing any new nitrous oxide pipelines in any new developments. The $1.5 billion new Footscray Hospital in Melbourne, pretty flash hospital, but they will be having no piped nitrous either. Prince Charles Hospital, and unfortunately we weren't able to have Mary here to speak to us, but Prince Charles in Brisbane, a very large hospital who have decommissioned their pipelines. They have an extensive new development which will turn them into the second biggest provider of paediatric services in Queensland. It includes outpatients facilities, paediatric ED, along with adults, 2 new operating theatres, and they have committed to proceeding with this new development without any piped nitrous. So I think if you take that in addition to a lot of the guidelines that we have around, including the Australian Health Facility Guidelines, the New South Wales guidelines, that are all easily accessible. But in particular, I should defer to the land of Trump. Even the American Society of Anesthesiologists is recommending no new pipelines for nitrous oxide in any clinical care for new developments. So I think things are looking pretty good. And Eugenie, as you said before, it's probably accelerating faster than even we probably imagined it would. So unless anyone else has got any comments, I will say firstly a very big thank you to all of the people who've turned up to watch, and we're even at 8:31 and most people are still here. Watch and listen. I think it was a great webinar actually. The speakers, have to say, have done thousands of hours of largely unpaid and unrecognised work. So I can't thank them enough for once again giving their time to come and give their presentations and share their wisdom and knowledge with all of us. And I don't think we need to show the QR code before, Justin or Kaz. regarding anyone who's doing any work on nitrous in their hospital. But Kaz, if you wanted to put your email address or something in the chat, if you are that trusting, then that might be another way that people could get in touch with you and give you some information about what they might be doing on nitrous decommissioning or monitoring their procurement. So I think with that, we might call it a night.
Great. Thank you, Anthony, for organising this, and everyone for attending as well. Well done.
Thank you very much, Eugenie.
Bye.
Okay. Fall out.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.